One of the things which confuses people about the concept of Jungian archetypes is their exact origin. How is it possible that the mind can contain preformed ideas without having directly experienced them in the outer world? From one perspective, this question is unanswerable, since we don't really know the true origins of any psychic experience. Just as consciousness remains unexplained, so too does the unconscious mind. However, when one takes a biological perspective, the archetypes can be traced to our genetics, and are in fact pre-equipped behaviors which allow us to make rapid decisions. In other words, they are no different from instincts. Except we can make a distinction between instincts in a behavioral sense and instincts in an archetypal sense, since the latter is describing the same phenomenon, but from a psychological perspective. It is easy to think that human beings are idiosyncratic, and while it is true that we are individually unique, having lived different experiences of life, there are aspects of the human psychological experience which are more or less shared by all people. This is because the human psyche is a product of a long biological process, which is subject to the same forces of evolution, which gradually change our bodies. For enormous spans of prehistory, our minds have evolved to be able to survive and pass on our genes successfully to the next generation. Archetypes are nature's solution to a specific psychophysiological problem. How can an organism make rapid decisions without needing to process all of the details of a specific situation? For instance, it would be immensely beneficial if you could quickly decide whether to fight or flee from a predator without having to weigh your options, which would otherwise be time-consuming. The psyche is in fact equipped just for this situation, allowing us to make a rapid decision with little conscious effort. Archetypes also have the advantage of motivating an organism towards behaviors which are advantageous for survival. In this sense, archetypes are constantly influencing our decisions. As Anthony Stevens writes, any physical environment possesses immense perceptual complexity, and it is essential that the organism should confine its attention to those aspects of the environment that are most relevant to survival. Thus, ethology teaches us that all organisms are programmed to perceive the world in specific ways, and to select and respond to key stimuli, which possess special significance within the context of the organism's Umwelt. The German word Umwelt means environment, but it also captures the animal's psychological context as well, since our psyches are attuned to pay attention to certain aspects of our environment, while ignoring others. The archetypes evolved for the reason that certain experiences recur so typically that it increases efficiency to have pre-equipped behavioral mechanisms should the situation arise. We are also compelled by these archetypes in subtle ways, through the unconscious, in order to perform certain behaviors. The human mind is a product of millions of years of evolution, reaching far back into the reptilian age, and our brains still bear the traces of this archaic origin. In some ways, it is more accurate to think of a human being as a highly specialized reptile, since the reptilian portions of our minds are still there. With this long history, it makes sense that certain modes of behavior are innate, i.e., they don't need to be learned, but rather pre-exist. Every animal has such behavioral mechanisms. For instance, when birds build nests, they don't do so by learning from other birds. Rather, they possess an instinctual inclination to build a nest at the right time. This behavior is hardwired and genetically encoded. Similar instinctual mechanisms exist in the human genetic code. These genes may be involved in coding the structure of certain brain regions, in the development of physiological organs, or in the production of certain hormones, and all of these play a role in shaping our behavior. The psychologist John Bowlby noted that humans too experience typically expected situations, and are equipped with instincts for when these situations arise. Man's behavior is very variable, it is true, but it is not infinitely so. And though cultural differences are great, certain commonalities can be discerned. For example, despite obvious variability, the patterns of behavior, often very intensely motivated, that result in mating, in the care of babies and young children, and in the attachment of young to parents, are found in almost all members of the human race, and seem best considered as expressions of some common plan, and, since they are of obvious survival value, as instances of instinctive behavior. With this biological definition, archetypes are actually quite simple, and in fact Carl Jung himself admitted that many basic human instincts are archetypal, such as our desire for food or to form close social bonds. However, as I said before, archetypes can be distinguished from instincts, and that the archetype is the instinct from one's individual perspective. An instinct is the behavioral concomitant, or in other words, instincts can be observed in other people through their behavior, but archetypes are experienced subjectively by that person in their own mind. This distinction, however, isn't really that significant for understanding archetypes. Archetypes and instincts are functionally synonyms of each other. In Jungian psychology, the name given for certain archetypes reflects their role in behavior, and it is not clear how many there are, nor how distinct they are from each other, since some archetypes seem to blend together or to have a common origin. For instance, the mother archetype is the instinctual impulse children feel to form a close connection with their mothers, in order to feel safe and secure in her arms. The father instinct is related to our ability to trust and abide the commands of authority figures, very often our fathers, but also sometimes not, and to submit to their authority. Both of these instincts are observed in wild animals, and so can be presumed to be very ancient. The archetype of the anima and the animus is also an instinctual impulse, which probably evolved in order to allow us to form a close connection with a romantic partner. Since this instinct is so important for passing on our genes, it can exert an almost possessive influence over us. As Anthony Stevens writes, "When a man experiences passionate attraction to a woman, it is because she seems to embody his anima, and she appears to him more beautiful, more numinous than any other woman around, often to the stupefaction of his friends, who completely fail to understand what he sees in her." The archetype of the shadow has its origins as a mechanism for identifying potential threats, particularly things and people which are deemed unfamiliar. This archetype plays a significant role in human conflicts, demonstrating that while humans have moved beyond our archaic patterns of life, the archetypes in our genetic codes still continue to shape our affairs. Not all genetically acquired physiological traits are shared between all people. For instance, schizophrenia, bipolar disorders, and even depression can be influenced by genetics, and so in some sense are archetypal. But Jungian psychology tends to focus more on archetypes, which are more widespread, and so ancient that they pretty much exist in all people. One interesting thing about archetypes is that because they are so innate in the psyche, their influence even appears in our cultural creations. Religions and the belief in gods seems to have an archetypal origin in the human psyche. Our instinct to revere a higher power is likely related to the father archetype, as well as our instinct to feel a sense of belonging. This is why Carl Jung concluded that there must be an impersonal layer of the psyche, which isn't derived from personal experience, but must be the result of our genes. In other words, a collective unconscious. The collective unconscious being the repository of man's experience, and at the same time the prior condition of this experience, is an image of the world which has taken eons to form. In this image, certain features, the archetypes or dominants, have crystallized out in the course of time. They are the ruling powers, the gods, images of the dominant laws and principles, and of typical, regularly occurring events in the soul's cycle of experience. Our myths also contain themes which seem to be derived from our archetypal psyche. The hero's journey, for instance, seems to arise from the instinctual impulse for independence, not to be ruled according to the rules of others, but to establish one's own destiny, and live according to their own principles. Consciousness of the archetypes serves two main purposes. 1. It allows us to utilize these archetypes in particular ways, in order to make the best use of them. The second reason is that it allows us to understand when our behaviors are being compelled by the archetypes, and so it gives us a way to subvert their influence. As an example of both of these scenarios, the anima can be a useful archetype for feeling a strong emotional connection to another person, as well as to transform our personalities more positively. At the same time, being unhealthily obsessed with someone can be undone when one acknowledges the secret influence of the anima or animus. Carl Jung's theory of archetypes is often misunderstood, but it is no more radical than saying that humans have instincts. The more conscious we are of the archetypes, the better equipped to both utilize them to their full potential and recognize when they are leading us astray.